This is Anna Patterson with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. We're going to go ahead and kick it off. We have a lot of highlights this week, so I'm just going to go down that list first. So, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act passed in the House, installs with the president. However, there is a clock on that. So, after that clock runs out, we are hopeful that this act will still pass and become law. The parking lot reform bill that we were talking about several weeks ago and pushing for is expected to pass the Senate this afternoon. So some positive news. I'll be there later today to commemorate that. And this is a good, again, example of practical balance land use reform that will help housing supply. On the negative side, the House Bill 437 is expected to receive its concurrence vote in the House later today. That is a bill that combines the two Cicero-inspired bills, both criminalizing homelessness through unauthorized public camping and drug-free homeless service zones. The fourth highlight is the budget. So after over 1,000 days, we are expected to see a public draft released today, and they're pushing for a vote this week. Early drafts so far look promising, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the last and final highlight is the National Low-Income Housing Coalition has released some of their renter survey findings. So we're going to go over some of those data highlights, but let's go ahead and go straight into organizational updates. As you already know, we are developing and updating our policy agenda for the upcoming legislative session that starts next year in 2027. So in preparation for that, we're doing several different things, one of which is a survey, and we want your input. This is a statewide, network-wide survey, ecosystem-wide survey, so we want to make sure that we consult everyone across our housing ecosystem, from homelessness services to affordable housing development, in order to build a robust, high-impact policy agenda that actually addresses housing supply, subsidy, stability, and systems in North Carolina. And we want to make sure our agenda remains relevant and responsive to what our ecosystem cares about and is working on. This policy agenda is going to guide our state legislative advocacy for the next 2 years, which is why it's critical to get your perspective and expertise. So we ask that you share your input, take a few minutes to share your input on our 2027-2028 policy agenda. This survey will actually close July 12th. So be on the lookout for more updates. But if you have already filled it out, please make sure you share it with a few people that you think will have things to say, want to be a part of that process, and really look forward to learning more about what folks are caring about these days. Moving on to federal updates. As I mentioned earlier, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act passed in the House, and it is now stalled on the president's desk. So even after months of negotiations, the House and Senate finally passed the first comprehensive bipartisan housing package in over a decade last week. The aides for President Trump actually expressed that he does approve of the 21st Century Road to Housing Act legislation, which included a lot of his priorities. However, shortly before the signing ceremony was scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the president changed course abruptly and announced that he would not sign the housing bill until Congress passes the same act, which is completely unrelated legislation. It's actually regards to voting. And so this act regards to voting legislation and would actually block millions of eligible American citizens from being able to vote. Yesterday, the Speaker, Mike Johnson, officially sent the legislation to the president, which starts a 10-day window for the president to either sign the bill, veto it, or let it sit and become law without his signature. If the president vetoes the bill, both the Senate and House will need to pass it again with a two-thirds majority, which they have. So we have included a link to a summary of what's included in the final piece of legislation, and we'll talk a bit more about that likely in a piece in the next week or so. But we are keeping an eye on that time clock since it was sent to the president's desk yesterday. Moving on to state updates, House Bill 437 passed the Senate last week and will return to the House today for concurrence vote. This is a dangerous bill targeting the most vulnerable North Carolinians. And so instead of focusing on solutions, this bill criminalizes their crisis and adds more legal and financial pressures to the local communities and governments that are trying to serve them. So we want to also thank, even though this is a really dangerous bill and it's quite unfortunate that it's reached this point, we need to take a moment to thank more than 250 individuals and organizations who signed on to our letter opposing this bill. We sent out a joint call to action letter with the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness, and the overwhelming support that we received and speaking out against this bill from members across our housing ecosystem, including developers, local governments, service providers, practitioners, ministers of faith, and advocates, I think says a lot about our housing ecosystem and about communities across our state. We do not want this bill. We do not believe in this bill. The House convenes at 10:30 this morning with HB 437 on the agenda for a concurrence vote. So you'll be able to stream it live if you go to the General Assembly website. Once this vote takes place, it goes to the governor's desk. And if there is a veto, there will be some call to action after that. So we will make sure to keep you all up to date. But again, thank you for showing up and showing out about HB 437. House Bill 369 had sort of a bit more of an arduous journey through the Senate than anticipated, but today, later this afternoon, and the afternoon voting session is expected to pass. And this is the parking lot modernization bill, leading to the elimination of parking minimums in most communities across North Carolina. And so, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be there later today at the General Assembly. Definitely thankful for this positive light, this positive piece of news um, in the grand scheme of things. Moving on to the budget. So late Sunday evening, the House and Senate finally reached a budget deal. You probably saw headlines about it. We saw a few early drafts that were kind of leaked yesterday, and they look promising for the Workforce Housing Loan Program and other programs that we care about surrounding key housing appropriations and then at the housing and health intersection. However, they're still being made, so we didn't want to dive into details in that regard. And we hope that the early drafts stick. It looks like WELP was funded in some of these early drafts, as well as a sort of 2.0 version of the Healthy Opportunities pilot. But again, like I mentioned, changes are still being made. We anticipate that the public version will be released later today. And they're actually pushing to do the vote this week. So, really trying to kind of push everything through before the upcoming holiday. Again, North Carolina is the only state that has not passed a comprehensive budget for the 2-year fiscal cycle that began over a year ago. Moving on to reports, events, and resources. I mentioned earlier the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the National Renter Survey that they did in 2025. And so I just want to lift up a few of those data points. We do have local headlines and some disaster recovery news, so I don't want to skip over that. So that will be in the call notes for you when you check that out. But looking at this report in particular, in this report in the 2025 National Renter Survey, they found a few things. Some of the themes included experiences with moving, that unaffordable rents were both a motivator and a barrier to moving. So there were renters who considered or took steps towards moving in the last 2 years, but ultimately did not move. Almost 40% cited being unable to afford their current rent as a reason why they wanted to move. And then 70% of these almost movers said they did not move because they could not actually find a home with affordable rent. So people are essentially being stuck in places where they're already cost burdened, but they want to move in hopes of kind of releasing the pressure that comes with being cost burdened, but they can't. Another theme around housing costs and housing assistance, renters who identify as Black or African American, who have or live with someone who has a disability or chronic health condition, or who live in lower income households, reported struggling to pay rent more frequently over the last 2 years than any other demographic groups. In terms of accessibility needs in rental housing, about 10.2 million adult renters in the US either need or live with someone who needs accessibility features to live safely and independently. And most renters' households' accessibility needs are going unmet. at least 65%, I'll say that again, 65% of renters who need mobility features and over 77% of renters who need sensory features don't actually have them in their current home. So we have folks who are living in homes that, rather than allowing them to be mobile and have high quality of life and be their full selves, um, are unable to do so. Another theme around safe and habitable rental housing. 4 out of 5 renters, so this is almost 80%, according to the report, agreed that rental homes should be actually required to pass periodic inspections conducted by an authorized agency to ensure those homes are safe to live in. So this says a lot, not only from moving from availability, so we're talking about supply, looking at affordability, looking also at quality, looking at stability and accessibility, and right back to quality, in terms of the beliefs that there should be periodic inspections. I just want to lift up a few other events and resources. The National Low Income Housing Coalition is having a disaster housing recovery advocacy toolkit training today from 2 to 3:30 p.m. There's a webinar, and you can learn more and register in the call link in the notes, or go to the National Low Income Housing Coalition website. There should be an advertisement for this webinar. I highly recommend that you go and you check it out. And then last but not least, want to lift up the North Carolina chapter of the American Planning Association. Next week is actually having a meetup in Charlotte in South End. So this is open to all planners in related fields. So if you're in that area or near that area, recommend checking it out. Thank you as always for tuning in. Again, don't forget that our policy agenda survey is open through July 12th. Really need to make sure we have everyone's input. And so if you've already filled it out, share it with 2 to 3 people. If you haven't already checked it out, please do so by July 12th. And again, I look forward to talking to you all next time.